here on, we take the discussion towards the specific text that Professor Richa Bajaj would be dealing with, and Neil Simon will come out, in that form in which literary expression becomes much more focused than in the general sense. And let's see how he is able to, conceive and imagine characters in their specific circumstances, and what is the inner world that he would be able to show in the characters that he has picked up and shown in his play, particularly The Odd Couple. So from here, Professor Bajaj will be discussing this text and the related matters.
Yeah, thank you.
Over to you.
Yes. I, in fact, would like to begin with a sense of what Neil Simon says about himself. So, Neil Simon treated subjects of life comically, right? And he maintains the same sense of humor about his own person. And I'd like you to see how he talks about himself, and in 1986, when he thinks he's old and he's ailing and he has some gastric issues or he has some problems and he's dealing with this, right? And I'd like you to look at this quote where he's talking about really himself here and the process of writing, right? So take a look at this, and I quote, it's from the introduction to his collected volume of plays. Here you have that quote. Alas, like Dorian Gray, the true picture is hidden in the attic of the mind, locked and kept from view to all except wife, family, and a few close friends, and a plethora of medical men who daily struggle to keep the deadly radiation of neurosis from melting down and destroying this prolificity plant and all who live in the radius of its emotional and co-working environs, unquote. This is how he refers to himself also, he's referring to himself as this plant that everybody is trying to keep alive. There is a whole lot of medical people out there who are, using their expertise to, to keep the neurosis off, and who live in the radius of its emotional and co-working environs. This, in a way, why I chose this particular quote is also because you understand that for this writer, friends, family, close people, they mean something, even though he realizes that he's almost insufferable and they can't put up with him, and yet they do. And the inability of being able to live outside emotional relationships. So, unlike modernist writers who believed in a kind of a warp and a kind of time warp and a kind of enclosed reality and a kind of an isolation where a human being could not connect with others, in Neil Simon you find that characters do want to connect with one another and they do help out one another, and yet when they help out they realize that they should have let the person die rather than helping. So it's that kind of a comedy that he is able to introduce in his works, and that is something which is at the center of this play also that I'll be taking up for discussion today, The Odd Couple. Now, as the title itself suggests, The Odd Couple. Now, it's interesting that The Odd Couple had its first production, which was an all-male, which was a male version, and then 20 years down the line, it came. Neil Simon wrote another version for the female. So there is a male version of Odd Couple and a female version of Odd Couple. Now, what is this really about? The text as such, right? Now, to talk about, so The Odd Couple, the male version was the one that came out first in 1965, and in this version, you have the play captures actually the ordinary lives of these 6 characters, 6 friends, Murray, Winnie, Roy, Speed, Oscar and Felix. The last 2 are the most important, Oscar and Felix, because it is they who really constitute the odd couple in this text. Now they have this ritual of, these friends have a ritual of meeting for a game of poker weekly, and they all gather at Oscar's house. Now Oscar is divorced, and everybody else has a partner or is married. So Oscar is divorced, and so he has a house that he wants, and it's a 8-bedroom house. It's like this old kind of a place which is quite big for him, and he's also doing well otherwise. He's a sports writer, and so he's in a decent job. So Oscar, but he likes to lead a carefree life, and he doesn't like to clean the house. It's always a mess, and with pieces scattered and with food lying all the time. So he enjoys that. That is for him a kind of freedom from marriage that he visualizes here. So that is Oscar, and Felix is the next character, who's the main actually character with Oscar, who has been dumped by his wife. Now the friends meet for a game of poker. So Act 1 actually opens with one of these evenings, and the scene is played out in Oscar's living room, we are told, on a hot summer evening, and they're complaining about how Oscar's refrigerator doesn't work, how his air conditioner doesn't work, and all of that. And the game of poker continues. The cards are being dealt, and they are playing, and while they're having their own set of conversations. Act 2 brings us to the point. Act 2 scene 1 really takes us to the point where Felix has moved in Oscar's house because he has been dumped by his wife, right? So in this case, you find that Oscar takes Felix in, and the friends are trying to help Felix because they feel that Felix might commit suicide, in fact, and because he has, that they expect him to be, because he's a kind of an emotional mess for all of them. So they try to really talk him out of this entire situation, and yet Oscar offers him that, well, you can stay at my place. Now in Act 2 scene 1, you find the situation is completely changed in Oscar's house, which was very messy and dirty and all of that. Felix's presence has changed the entire atmosphere, but it has also added tension between the two of them, because Felix is excessively anxious about everything. He has an obsessive sort of compulsive disorder to keep cleaning things and to keep cooking. So he is in fact a very effeminate sort of a male who cries, who cooks, and who's cleaning, and who takes pride in offering good food to people, and so on and so forth. So, but Felix is aware that he calls himself a neurotic nut. He says that I am a neurotic nut, and he says you are crazy and I am a neurotic nut, and we are living together. So it's he calls himself that, but he suffers from really a lot of insecurities and self-deprecation in that sense. This anxiety disorder is in fact visible in the fear and the worry that he keeps showing about everyday life. How he has so many problems, and how nobody can live with him, how he always has feared such a thing. So in a way they talk about the deep-seated fears that and the worries that people at the time had. So this anxiety disorder is really about this place is really a comedy of an urban disorder, rather in general. It's not just Felix sort of anxiety disorder, but an urban disorder of sorts, where each character is crazy or neurotic in one or another way. You find that, and so that is what we become aware of, even though we laugh at their scenes and how they are running after one another, ready to punch one another, and all of that. But Act 2 scene 2 really brings us brings these two female characters who are really their neighbors, and and Oscar wants Felix to begin a new relationship with one of them, and Felix is again incapable of entering any relationship. He's fragile at this moment and almost destroyed as a person. The marriage, the fact that his wife dumped him, and that his children live with the wife, and that he's been left out and he's been discarded from a family, creates this kind of neurosis in him, and he feels that he's lost out on everything. And this kind of sentimentalism, in fact, in his case, or you can say this kind of over sentimentalism, or this kind of this angle really brings in irony and humor as well, because it becomes melodrama sometimes, so melodrama leads to this kind of irony and humor, and yet we are taken back to the really tragic point that Felix finds himself in this particular play. The point is not lost on the viewers that the relationship have become in general tenuous and weak in this kind of a setting, and that people have become impatient with one another. So again, I was talking about the American consciousness and the American culture during that period. Now in this sense, you can see these characters who are on the edge of almost killing one another, almost just fighting with one another, and they are weak in general, and they try to find escape routes, finding two girls they can. So in fact, this is also a point which is a kind of a playboy syndrome that actually took place in America, that you wanted to just and this is about sexuality, that that came out, a new kind of trend came out, that you could be with many people, have several partners, and sleep with them. But the idea is that the central idea here is that the people's inability to find happiness and to be able to find a sense of to be able to gratify themselves in the moment becomes the escape route for people, to be able to not think about their daunting reality. And it is this underlying fact that Neil Simon here is pointing at, that Oscar tries to take Felix to meet these two girls because he thinks that that's the way out of situation. So how to come out of a bad marriage, is to continuously have several flings. So again, the sense of stability or a sense of a stable human relationship is impossible, and that is something that both Oscar and Felix realize. And even when they think that as men they can sit together and form that kind of companionship, very soon they realize that Oscar and Felix realize that they cannot live with one another as well. So it's not that it's anti-female, that it's women or marriage or family that is the restriction. It is also that as men they can't relate to one another. And of course there's the larger sexual confusion which I'd like to talk in a bit around this play, but let me take you through the acts. So Oscar can't put up with Felix for long, and we realize that Felix is finally discarded by him. He also throws Felix out of his house. So finally Felix has this feeling about himself that nobody wants him, and he says that yes, I know nobody wants me because I am insufferable. Now the other friends really think, particularly Murray, really thinks that Felix and Oscar are in a great place because they are out of their marriages, and Murray still has to go back to his wife and is restricted in that fold. So Murray in fact tells Felix in the play, and I quote, that fate has just played a cruel and rotten trick on you, so just enjoy it, unquote. Now that's the larger approach and attitude of the large chunk of Americans at the time, that if fate has just played a very cruel trick on you and a very rotten trick on you, you can't do anything, so just enjoy it. How do you enjoy suffering? And that's the approach. So this also takes us to the larger point around this play and about the American consciousness that I was talking about, that people have this kind of a survival syndrome, I would say, that they think that we have to survive, so just enjoy it, just deal with it, just bear with it, just go on, even if it is unbearable and cruel, just get on with it and get on with life. So this kind of that you have to survive, as life is bad, you have to go on, life is really cruel, you have to survive it.
What is the life pattern that they are supposed to confront? Are they pursuing certain ideals and they fail in realizing them?
No, there are no ideals that they are following. In fact, they all have jobs to go to. During the day, they are like Murray is a police officer, has to go to the job. Evenings, they have family tie-ups and they have to go with the family. Vinny has to catch a flight. He keeps telling us in the play that I have to catch a flight with my wife. We are going to Florida. So, the idea that they have a set pattern of life. Morning is for works.
What makes them neurotic?
This is exactly what makes them neurotic. This kind of a repetitiveness of life, which is non-liberating. That mornings go in their work, which they find is unbearable, and they are not able to stick to their work for long. And evenings they are with family, and they're with marriage, they're with couples. They are unable to live that kind of life. So as a release, they go and meet their friends. And when they go and meet, they don't want to think. They don't want to exercise their mind at all. All they want to do is just look at some sport or play a game of poker and not think. So the idea to not think about life is a kind of an escape route that they find to go to the simplified version of life, or to the simple life of just playing a game which has rules and nothing about it. There is no complexity on a kind of a poker table. It's cards are dealt, somebody wins, somebody loses, the game goes on, and you eat and drink and you come back home.
Do they live in a bubble of unreality?
I don't think they want to live in a bubble of unreality. They are trying to escape that kind of reality that is daunting for them, and they realize that wherever they go, they cannot escape it. So there is this sense of a haunting sense of reality, and yet you don't feel it's haunting because it is comically portrayed. The text is comically portrayed, and even there's another angle to it. This is not just this. There is a kind of sexuality, or he's also known as the playwright of sexual confusions, because you see how odd and why they are an odd couple is because both Felix and Oscar, initially when you think of the odd couple, you think of a married couple as husband and wife, right? Now Oscar and Felix have both had marriages, and Oscar is divorced and Felix is about to divorce his wife. So both are divorced and they are living together. And when they start living together, what Neil Simon is trying to show here is that they both start behaving as husband and wife. So the pattern of husband and wife is replicated between Felix and Oscar when they start to live together. They behave as a couple and they have domestic quarrels. Felix is angry with Oscar if he comes late home. So while divorce is a major factor in their relationships and that brings them together, you find that that pattern gets replicated in the case of the male-male friendship as well. And Oscar here tells Felix, and I'd like to quote here, he says, I quote, "For 6 months I lived alone in this apartment, all alone in 8 rooms. I was dejected, despondent and disgusted. Then you moved in, my dearest and closest friend. And after 3 weeks of close personal contact, I am about to have a nervous breakdown. Do me a favor, move into the kitchen, live with your pots, your pans, your ladle with meat thermometer." And this is how it ends. So it says, Felix says, "What are you talking about?" And Oscar says, "It's all over, Felix. The whole marriage. We are getting an annulment. Don't you understand?" So the marriage between these two friends, the best friends, even that is called off. It's over. The marriage between us is over. So there is one which is the conventional marriage, but the other which gets played out between Oscar and Felix. So much so that, towards the end, of course, Felix moves out and there's a lot of emotional drama that takes place there. But towards the end, they end on a truce and they decide to return to the game of poker. And Felix moves out of the house and joins the two girls in the beginning, Cecily and Gwendolyn, their neighbors. He moves in their house now because he has been thrown by the wife, thrown by his friend, and now he's joined these two girls upstairs who live on a floor above. But Felix observes that marriages may come and go, but the poker game will go on. So he's happy to come back to a game of poker the next Friday. So, and in this entire jumble, you actually find that Oscar refers to Felix as Blanche, that was his ex-wife, and Felix refers to Oscar as Frances, his ex-wife. So, in a way, the idea that sexuality or sexual confusion is created here, or that marriages are not, it's a role play. Right? Both Felix and Oscar were playing a role play in this odd couple scenario.
In the social sense, they are, I think, seeking some kind of companionship.
Yes,
and that they are not getting.
That they are not getting.
What is that ideal companionship that they are having the illusion of trying for?
I don't think they outline that. I could give my answer that they may be looking at this or that, but they never really formulate their ideal. What they know is what they suffer. For instance, Oscar says that, when I took you in, I was dejected, despondent and disgusted because he was alone. He says, I want you to move in because I feel really alone, because they don't want to be alone. That's something which is there. They don't want to be alone and they want to have people, and yet their inability to be able to live with them. So that is, so they know what they face and they haven't formulated what they'd like, right? So when Oscar says that I was dejected because I was alone living in this house and I didn't have anybody, I was despondent and I was disgusted by this kind of a living. I wanted somebody to move in with me, and he decides to call his friend to move in with him. Very soon they realize they are role playing the husband-wife relation, and fighting, having domestic quarrels. So
is there a kind of neighborhood in the background? That these two people live, and then there are neighbors, and that there is a pressure from the neighbor. So it's a kind of a social situation.
No, there is no kind of a neighbor. The neighborhood they have is of these two girls, who've come from England and are now staying in New York, and they try to befriend them because they'd like to have some sort of a nice time with them or something. But there is no extended neighborhood as such. They're just living in an apartment which overlooks New Jersey. So
the market.
No, the scene is totally domestic. It takes place inside the living room of Oscar's house. In fact, they'd never go out. Everything happens there. Act 1, Act 2, both they take place in the living room of Oscar's house, and the whole act
and
scene
the
is
living
played
room,
there.
suppose one says that he's trying to build up a kind of metaphor.
Yes, certainly. Metaphor for domesticity. Yes.
For domesticity.
So, you see, the presentation of sexual relations become problematic because we have entered the domestic sphere, and we've seen people who were outside now enter this world and behave in a particular manner.
How does it reflect on the larger society outside? What do you call America? The American dream and all those things.
You see, there is no American dream in the 1960s and 70s. In fact, the dream has been shattered. The war has taken place. I think what he's trying to show is the kind of the fall. The constant. The how life seems to go in some sublime moments and then turns trivial. So there is this kind of graph that takes that you follow, that of an emotional intense scene, and then a kind of a comic ridiculous scene, the sublime moment where people connect, and then the trivial. So that's what all these people are dealing with. And resolution, I think, becomes an important point in a comedy, and especially in this one, because when people in Broadway theatre also, people wanted in the 1960s and 70s to find resolution, to find a comic ending. So the fact that the poker game itself is a kind of a metaphor that they play in the living room of Oscar's house, where they are all seated, because it's not the game that is important, it is their way of connecting with one another, because otherwise they are not able to connect.
No, I'm trying to visualize America from with taking help from such a play. America as a country, as a nation, as a United States,
right,
represents, let's say, a kind of critical awareness of the world in which they live. And there are all kinds of wars being fought,
right,
and America is directly involved.
Right. Especially in the 1960s with the Vietnam War,
yes,
etc.
Yes.
No, but what
and
is
the Cold War situation and culture.
Yeah. No, I think what this play really tries to put forward is this kind of a moral failure that has occurred in the urban life of America. That the urban American life is a kind of a moral failure. That this life outside, or lived as it is, so we don't see the job situation outside, but we know that characters who are living in this house, or who are there in this house, they are there for a brief time. Right, and in this brief time, their attitude and their approach to life, the value system that they have, their person, their character really is put forward. And in this, you find that each is struggling in their own ways, and each is trying to just look at a kind of a immediate moment of gratification, because the long-term solution or the long-term resolution is not possible.
The atmosphere of the workplace, because they must be working somewhere.
Right, like Murray is a police officer, and he refers to what goes on in his life. Oscar is in this kind of a writer, a sports writer. So there are references to their outside life, and
does the workplace impinge on the space that you are talking about?
In the sense of oppression, the oppressiveness of that space that they want to forget when they meet for a game of poker. To think of it, it's only a play about a game of poker which is played with friends who get together for an evening, right? It's just their friends coming together for an evening and spending some time together playing a game. And yet it is the oppressiveness of the world outside that they're trying to counter and trying to forget in this kind of game that they play together. So I think that they realize that characters are also failed survivors really of that American experience that was meant to give them happiness. But as I said, that you can also see a kind of a fading middle class, because very soon all these characters who are a part of a middle class, an urban middle class, they are very soon going to be sucked in the lower sections of society. Or if they manage, at least this group doesn't look like, is going to maybe become the affluent sections in society. So very soon this middle class is going to be sucked in the larger poverty-stricken world that would exist, and create a kind of a widening gap between the rich and the poor in the country. So they are somewhere in between, in these two groups. While they can afford their livelihood, they can come to friends and catch up and have chips and a drink, etc. So it's that kind of life that we are looking at, that they are just merely surviving in this situation. And the significance of the the regular poker game, which is an all male venture also, really speaking. They are all boys who are sitting together to play the game. It is also to be able to shun the world of marriage, family, women also, where they don't want to and the pressures of, for instance, paying the alimony to the wife or the ex-wife. So they want to be in a simplified space, and that poker game becomes the simplified space where they want to spend time and not think about anything. So I think that's what while we know that everything else in their life is on the edge, while we know that this is their only moment of sanity where they're probably sitting together and having a laugh, everything else is on the verge of disintegration. So everything, it's like reminds me of how Shatranj Ke Khiladi by Premchand would have been played. Like the world is falling apart, and you can sit down for a game of poker or chess. So in a way, there is larger disintegration which is apparent in their lives outside, how they've been living, and so a sense of emptiness.
They are not living their life, they are merely evading that life, and then they want to while away their time in poker.
Right.
And so they are playing a role.
Right.
But they are not living life in the sense in which we understand the term.
Right, obviously, and that is what it is. It is actually this is symptomatic of a wider disorder or a malaise in society that is projected not tragically, but rather oddly, and that's what makes it an odd couple. A kind of an odd couple, and so it's not a tragic take on this entire disintegration.
What is the normal vision? Odd, the opposite of odd is normal.
Right.
So what is the normal vision that the writer would like to present for the...
That's something that Neil Simon really doesn't give. Neil Simon doesn't give us a kind of a way out. There is a sense of continuity of this drama that he seems to be talking about, that life seems to continue and this drama of life will continue, even though in passing he mentions some things that are that require a deeper analysis. But I think as a Broadway writer, he doesn't have much choice. He cannot bring people to talk about the intense issues of life. And they're not there for that, right?
You seem to be very critical of this kind of writing. So
no, I'm not critical of this writing in the sense that I see where it's coming from, in the sense that I wish that the writer somewhere gave a kind of a nugget of truth, somewhere, and crystallized it in something. But beyond that, I think that it's a very refreshing take on reality, because so much has been said in cliches and propaganda that I don't think that one can anymore talk in cliches anymore. So it's a refreshing take on how reality is to be pursued. The play will leave you thinking about things. The play, you will laugh during the play, you will enjoy the play, and that is again a skill to be able to achieve that, to be able to make the audience laugh and yet to be able to make them think. I think in today's situation, it's a difficult thing because reality has become very complex, and it's not like you can take an idea and put it out there for people to think. It's so multi-layered, and he merely touches these points and hints at them, doesn't take them through. But I think that remains for the reader to take forward.
So friends, Professor Richa Bajaj has told us about the vacuity of the life that certain sections in America live. And they are cut off from the reality around them, but they are able to have a nice time within themselves. They play the game, they while away the time, and perhaps there is some kind of truth hidden somewhere in the layers of this experience. So I hope you have enjoyed the talk, and you also have been made to think about a life when the world outside is too difficult to bear. Thank you.